Hello again, and welcome back to The Night Reader. I'm your storyteller tonight, and as always, I hope you're safe and warm wherever you're listening from. If you're new here, I invite you to like this story, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time the night found you. I love knowing where our little Night Reader family is joining from across the world. Now, dim your lights, settle in under your blanket, and breathe slowly. Tonight's story begins with something simple. A letter. A letter sent to the wrong person. Or perhaps exactly the right one. This story is called The Church in the Field. And it begins with a man who just wanted to be left alone. When I moved to Ashbrook, I wasn't looking for anything more than silence. After a year of barely surviving city life, a divorce, a layoff, and a stress-induced heart scare, I sold everything I could, packed what was left into the back of my truck, and drove 3 states away to a little farm property I'd found through an online auction. It was cheap. Too cheap, maybe. But I didn't ask questions. I just needed space. The town of Ashbrook was barely a town at all. No stoplights, no grocery stores, just one old diner and a gas station that shut down before dusk. The people were polite, but distant. The kind that wave when they drive by, but keep their stories to themselves. I like that. The farmhouse sat on the edge of an open field, surrounded by nothing but tall grass and distant hills. A single gravel road led to it, and the mailbox had been rusted shut when I arrived. That was fine. I wasn't expecting any mail. But 3 weeks into my new, quiet life, the letter arrived. It was a cold October morning. The sun had just started to burn off the mist when I found it. A single white envelope resting on my front porch. No postage stamp. No address. Just a name written in neat cursive. Mr. Daniel K. Morley. That wasn't my name. I nearly tossed it. But something about the handwriting gave me pause. It had a strange, deliberate elegance like the kind you'd see in old ledgers or religious texts. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and forgot about it until that night, when I was sitting by the fireplace, sipping whiskey and trying to work through a book I'd read 12 times before. I pulled the letter out and opened it. There was only one sheet inside. No signature, no date. Just a short message written in the same ornate hand. The congregation waits for the bell. It must ring again before the 13th night. You know where the rope lies buried. Do not delay. Midnight approaches. I read it 3 times, thinking it might be a joke. I didn't know any Daniel Morley, and I certainly didn't know anything about a bell. But as I stared at the letter, something strange happened. My hands began to tremble. Not from fear, exactly. It was more like recognition. There was something about the words, the bell, the 13th night, the congregation, that stirred something in me. Not a memory, not fully. More like a half-remembered dream, the kind that leaves you uneasy for hours after you wake. I folded the letter and shoved it into a drawer. But I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing sounds, soft, rhythmic tapping outside the house. I'd get up, look through the window, and see nothing but the empty field, bathed in moonlight. The next morning, I told myself it was just wind rattling the gutters. But then, the second letter came. This time, it was placed in my mailbox, which I had never bothered to fix or open. Yet, there it was. No rust, no damage. Just a clean white envelope resting on the lip of the open box. Mr. Daniel K. Morley. Again. The message inside was shorter. They grow impatient. The ground knows what you forgot. Listen for the weeping in the field. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at my window with the lights off, watching the field. The wind stirred the tall grass in waves, like something large moving beneath the surface. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. faint and distant, rising from the earth itself, a sound like crying. It wasn't the cry of a child. It was deeper, grating, almost hollow. I told myself I was imagining things. I almost believed it too, until I saw the figure standing in the field. It was a woman, I think, dressed in black, head bowed, arms hanging limply at her sides. She stood perfectly still, unmoving even as the wind tore through the grass around her. I don't know how long I watched. I blinked, and she was gone. The next morning, I searched the field. There were no footprints, no sign of anything, except a small depression in the earth about 20 yards out, like something heavy had been resting there for a long time. I didn't mention any of this to the townspeople. I was still the outsider, and I didn't want to be branded as the lunatic on the hill. But I began to notice things. The way people avoided the diner windows that faced the field. The way they fell silent if I asked about the church mentioned in the letter. One man, an old farmer with thick glasses and a cane, muttered something I'll never forget. No one goes out there after the 12th night. Not if they want to sleep again. By the 4th letter, I'd stopped pretending it wasn't meant for me. The altar is restless. You took the bell, Daniel. Return it before the 13th night, or the bell tolls in blood. That night, I dreamed of a church. It stood alone in the field, old and crooked, its steeple shattered. There was no sound but the creak of the weather vane and the distant sobbing from beneath the floorboards. I walked up to the door. It opened before I touched it. Inside, there were no pews, no windows, only rows of figures standing in the dark, facing the altar. Their heads were covered in burlap. Their arms hung down, unmoving. One by one, they turned to look at me. I woke up screaming. I don't know who Daniel Morley is, or was, but the house, the field, the land I thought I'd purchased for a quiet life, I think it belonged to him. Or maybe it still does. And whatever he did, whatever he left unfinished, is now mine to carry. There are 5 nights left before the 13th, and last night I heard the bell ring, even though the church in the field is gone. Or at least, I thought it was. The bell rang again last night. 2 long, mournful tolls rising up from the field just after midnight. It sounded cracked, like it had been buried for years and only just remembered how to sing. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the ceiling, barely breathing. The sound echoed in my chest like it had been rung inside me. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, or metal shifting on the old barn, out back. But there's no mistaking the sound of a church bell. Not when it carries something that feels older than the bones in your body. When I looked out the window, the field was empty. But the depression I had found yesterday lay, the strange, sunken shape in the grass, was deeper now, wider, as if something had been pushing up from underneath. The next morning, I went out with a shovel. Not because I wanted to, but because the message from the night before wouldn't leave my mind. You know where the rope lies buried. I didn't know, not consciously, but as I stood in the middle of the field, shovel in hand, a strange sense of direction pulled me forward. Not a memory, not instinct, something else. It was like walking with a magnet in my spine, tugging toward a place I didn't remember choosing. I dug for nearly an hour. At first, it was just cold earth and rocks. Then, about 2 feet down, the shovel struck something hard and hollow. Wood. I cleared the soil around it until I found what looked like a piece of timber. Not rotted like I expected, but blackened, scorched. I pried it loose and uncovered more of it, a square frame. maybe 2 feet across, set into the ground like the top of a well or a cellar entrance, and then I saw the rope, thick, frayed, and buried just below the wooden frame, coiled like a snake. I reached in with gloved hands and tugged at it. It didn't move. I pulled harder, bracing myself with my foot against the edge. The rope gave an inch, 2. Then something shifted beneath the earth with a groan so deep I felt it in my ribs. I let go and stumbled back. The air around me changed, still cold, but heavier, denser, like the field had exhaled something ancient. My ears rang. The sky overhead was clear, but the light dimmed, just a little. I left the rope alone after that. But that night, the bell rang again. 3 times, each ring louder than the last. And this time, the lights in my house flickered with each toll. The shadows seemed to stretch longer across the walls. I swore I saw movement in them, quick and skittering. I didn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace again. The old rifle I found in the attic laid across my lap, though I had no idea what I thought it would do. At 3:12 a.m., someone knocked on the front door. Not loud, just a soft, polite tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to my feet and crept to the door, standing to the side. I didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then I heard the voice. A woman's voice, software pleading. "Daniel, please, you have to finish it." The doorknob turned, slow and deliberate, but the bolt held. After a moment, I heard footsteps moving away across the porch. I peeked through the curtains. No one was there, but the front lawn was covered in fresh footprints, dozens of them, leading back into the field. And in the morning, I found something else waiting for me. A 5th letter. This one was nailed to my front door with a single rusted nail. 5 nights remain. You have stirred the altar. The rope remembers your hand. The bell remembers your name. I didn't open the door for the rest of the day. I kept the rifle close. Made coffee I never drank. Spent hours just staring at the letters I'd saved, now laid out across the table like sacred texts. Each one written in the same hand. Each one more insistent. I thought about Daniel Morley. Was he real? Did he live here before me? Or was he something else? A name given to a role, passed down like a title. That night, I took a risk. I went back into the field. I carried a lantern, the shovel, and a length of rope of my own, as if some modern tool might make a difference against whatever lived out there. The depression in the grass was now a crater, not just sunken, opened. The blackened wood was gone, and in its place, a round, jagged hole about 4 feet across, descending into darkness. I held the lantern over it. I expected to see a pit, or maybe a tunnel. What I saw instead was a staircase, cut into stone, spiraling down into the earth. The air that rose from it was thick with rot and something else, something sweet and cloying like old flowers in a sealed tomb. I should have run, I wanted to, but I heard it again. The bell, once, faint and low, and a voice from below. "Daniel, the altar is ready." I stood at the edge of the hole, lantern flickering in my shaking hand, staring into the stone staircase that coiled down into the blackness like the throat of something old and hungry. The field around me was silent, but not with peace, with expectancy. Like the grass, the trees, the wind itself was holding its breath. The voice that had whispered, up from the dark, that soft, mournful call of "Daniel, the altar is ready," still echoed faintly in my ears, like it hadn't come from below at all, but from somewhere inside me. I should have turned back. I knew that. But the pull was stronger than fear. Something deep in my bones, or deeper, knew I had to go down. That the story I'd wandered into wouldn't let me stay on the surface forever. So I stepped into the earth. The stone steps were damp, slick with moss and something darker I didn't want to identify. The walls of the spiral staircase were narrow, carved into compacted earth that had hardened with age. Every footstep echoed in a strange, muffled way. Not like sound bouncing back, but like it was being swallowed. After 10 steps, the light from the sky above was gone. After 30, the air changed. It grew thick and hot, humid like breath. The smell of old soil and flowers was stronger here, mingled now with smoke and something metallic. My lantern crackled in the wet air, the flame shrinking in protest. Then the steps ended. I found myself in a wide, circular chamber, carved from black stone. The ceiling was low and domed, the walls etched with symbols, not words, not anything I could recognize. Spirals, crosses, knots, all joined into patterns that made my skin crawl the longer I looked at them. In the center of the chamber, lit by nothing I could see, stood a wooden structure, a pulpit. Behind it, a bell. The same cracked, ancient bell I'd heard ringing at night. It stood suspended on a warped iron frame, coated in ash. A thick, frayed rope ran from its clapper to the base of the pulpit, where it wrapped several times around a narrow wooden spindle. And on the pulpit, nailed into the wood, was a 6th letter. I approached slowly, every step forward an act of will. I didn't want to know what it said, and yet I had to know. My fingers trembled as I pried the nail out and unfolded the paper. You rang the bell before the first war. You rang the bell to call the sleeping. Now you ring it once more. 6 tolls awaken the watchers. 7 feed them. 8 breaks the seal. You remember none of this, but the rope remembers your hands. I backed away, heart pounding. This couldn't be a prank. No one knew I was here. I hadn't told anyone about this place, not even when I first bought the land. Whoever wrote these letters, they weren't writing them now. They were waiting, or worse, watching. I turned to flee the way I'd come. But the staircase was gone. Not hidden, not blocked. Gone. The chamber was sealed. The wall where the stairs had been was now smooth black stone, unbroken. My lantern flickered and nearly went out. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, barefoot, from behind the bell. I crouched instinctively, pressing myself against the wall, trying to make myself small. A figure emerged, pale, gaunt, dressed in the decaying remains of what might once have been church robes. It moved with slow, deliberate steps, as if each one hurt, or as if it was savoring them. I didn't breathe. The figure stopped at the pulpit. Its face was shadowed by the angle of the light, but I saw its hands, long, thin fingers, each tipped with dark, broken nails. It reached down, gripped the rope beneath the spindle, and began to pull. The bell tolled once, louder than anything I've ever heard. It shook the walls. My ears rang. My teeth vibrated. I fell to my knees. Another pull. The second toll split the air like a scream. Then the figure turned, not to me, but to the wall, and raised a hand. A seam appeared in the stone, running from ceiling to floor, as if the rock itself remembered how to open. And then, it did. The stone split open with a hiss of air. Beyond it, I saw only darkness. But something in that dark shifted, moved. The figure stepped back, and the bell tolled a 3rd time. I ran. I didn't think, didn't reason. I just sprinted into the corridor that had appeared behind the open wall, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere. That wasn't here. The path was narrow and sloped downward, deeper into the earth. My lantern finally sputtered and died. I ran blind, hands scraping the walls, lungs burning. Then the tunnel opened into a larger space, a hall, or a chapel. Stone pews lined either side of a center aisle, all facing a raised platform with an altar carved from blackened wood. Candles burned there, though I hadn't seen them before. Their flames were blue. And behind the altar, standing perfectly still, was a woman. She wore a veil. Long, tattered white fabric covered her face and body, swaying gently though there was no wind. Her hands were folded in prayer. I stopped dead. Every instinct screamed to run the other way. I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. It was like the space itself had taken control of my body. The woman lifted her head, and though I couldn't see her face, I felt her eyes I didn't remember, but that remembered me. Then she spoke. Her voice was kind. Software, terrifying. "Daniel, it's almost time." The voice echoed through the chapel, not in volume, but in weight. It settled on my skin like humidity, soaking through my pores, into my bones. It was warm, somehow, motherly even, but twisted at the edges, like a lullaby sung off-key. "Daniel, it's almost time." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My tongue was heavy, pressed against the roof of my mouth as if I'd forgotten how language worked. My body still refused to move, not held by force, but locked by something deeper, like I was in a dream and the dream had decided I'd seen enough for now. The woman in white stepped forward. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like a dancer from some ancient ritual. The hem of her veil dragged across the stone floor behind her, leaving a faint line of soot or ash. I watched it trail, watched it mark a path that hadn't been there before. "I had hoped," she said, "that when the soil called you back, you would come with open eyes, that you'd remember. But even asleep, you found your way to me, and that means it's begun." My knees gave out, not from fear, or not only fear, but from the unbearable weight of something else pressing down on me. Something old, something that knew me. The woman stopped just a few feet away, close enough now that I could see her hands clearly beneath the veil. They were not young. Wrinkled skin, blue veins coiled beneath paper-thin flesh. Her nails were long and yellowing, but clean, reverently clean. She reached into her robes and withdrew something small, a folded slip of paper, marked with a black wax seal, the 7th letter. I couldn't stop myself from reaching out for it. The seal popped as my fingers touched it, the wax cracking like bone. I unfolded the parchment slowly, already dreading what I'd see. "Daniel, the watchers have begun to stir. The bells have rung 3 times. You brought them here once with fire and faith. You were their voice, their vessel. Now they need you again. There's no church in the town above. There never was. But beneath their house stands. And it remembers you." The woman leaned close. "Do you remember, Daniel?" she whispered. And I did. Not everything. Not names, not faces. But something cracked inside me, like a dam breaking in a dry valley. And the memories came pouring in, not as images, but as feeling. The smell of smoke, the roar of fire, the bell ringing, over and over and over. Not in fear, but in joy. And the chanting. So many voices, deep, guttural, words that burned as they were spoken. Not English, not Latin, something older. My head reeled. "I'm not him," I croaked, barely recognizing my own voice. But she only tilted her veiled head. "You were never him, Daniel. You were always it, the bellwether, the sacrifice that walks, the door, not the key." She turned then, walking back toward the altar. Behind it, a narrow passage yawned open, a black slit in the stone that hadn't been there a moment before. A hot wind drifted from it, thick with the scent of something burning far below. "Come," she said. "You must see what they've made of your absence." I hesitated. Something in me, some spark of defiance, pushed back. I turned on trembling legs and bolted, racing back the way I'd come. The chapel behind me groaned, the stone creaking like old wood. The passage I'd entered through was gone, sealed. But another had opened beside it, rough-hewn and descending in uneven steps, deeper still. No choice. I ran. The walls grew slick again. The air thickened. I could hear the bell tolling once more, this time muffled, distant. 4th toll, then a 5th. Whatever time I had left, it was bleeding away fast. At last, the path opened into a cavern, vast and echoing. I couldn't see the ceiling, only the outline of twisted pillars and strange shapes growing from the stone like coral. And in the center of the cavern, a town, or what remained of one. Not above ground, not something anyone had ever lived in. It was a shadow, a warped reflection, buildings half-formed and rotting, made of stone and bone and soil. Doors opened into nothing. Windows looked out into walls. And the sky above, or what passed for sky, was a ceiling of tangled roots and slow dripping earth. Shapes moved among the buildings, too tall, too thin, heads cocked at impossible angles. They walked with a jerking, stuttering motion like puppets whose strings were tangled. They didn't see me. Not yet. I kept low, weaving between the malformed houses, heart hammering. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I couldn't go back, that I had to keep going forward, down, in. A doorway opened in the center of the square. Not a real doorway, but a jagged tear in the air itself, like the space had decided to give up pretending it was solid. And through it came a voice. The same voice from the field, only this time it was louder. Daniel, Daniel, Bellborn's son, you have come home. The figures stopped, their heads all turned, all at once, and they screamed. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pain, it was hunger. The scream hit me like a wave, not just sound, but vibration, like 1,000 tuning forks pressed against my skull. Blood burst from my nose. I fell to the ground, clutching my ears, and then they began to run. No, not run, glide. Their limbs barely moved. They closed the distance in seconds, silent now, but no less terrifying. I scrambled to my feet and dove through the tear. For a moment there was nothing. No up or down. No breath. Only cold. Then I hit the ground hard and rolled. I was in another space now. A tunnel made of salt white stone, circular, slick with something oily. Candles burned in niches along the walls. Blue flames flickering wildly. A hand caught my arm. I screamed, but it was just a girl. She couldn't have been older than 10. Pale, barefoot, her eyes entirely black. They're awake now, she said calmly. And they're hungry. I stared at her, gasping. What do they want? I asked. Her smile was wide, too wide for her face. They want you to finish what you started. She placed another letter in my hand. The 8th. And behind me, through the tunnel, the scream began again. The girl's smile didn't fade. She stood in the glow of the flickering blue candles, as if the air around her didn't obey the same rules. No breath fogged from her lips. No fear shone in her eyes. Just that grin, serene, endless. She didn't wait for me to open the letter. She only said, "You'll need to go deeper now. They can't reach you yet. Not all of them. But the louder the bells, the thinner the walls. Soon, even the dark won't protect you." Then she turned and vanished into the tunnel without a sound. I held the 8th letter in trembling fingers. The wax seal a deep crimson this time, darker than the others. There was something wet clinging to it, sticky and metallic. Blood. It wasn't dry. I peeled it open carefully as if the parchment might bleed too. Daniel, you opened the way once. Not through magic, not through sin, through belief. They heard you because you meant it. Every word, every cry, every bell rung in devotion. Now they sleep lighter than ever. They dream of the field and the fire. If you descend, you might quiet them again. If you stay, you will become their mouthpiece, their prophet reborn. Time ticks in their cathedral beneath the earth. The hour is nearly struck. I let the letter drop. My hands were shaking again. Or still. Ahead of me, the tunnel curved downward. The walls had changed. They were no longer clean white stone, but gray and mottled, as if veins of something biological ran beneath the surface. The blue candles sputtered in their sockets, each flame bending slightly toward the descent, like they, too, were being drawn in. The bell rang again. 6 chimes. I didn't hear it with my ears, not directly. I felt it in my sternum, vibrating through the bone like a tuning fork. I clutched my chest, stumbled, and moved forward. The deeper I went, the more the tunnel began to change. Not just the walls, the geometry. Doors appeared set into the stone at uneven intervals. None of them made sense. Some were too small to crawl through. Others stretched far too tall, with no visible handles. Some glowed faintly with a dull, yellow light beneath the frames. Others leaked something darker, a thick, tar-like sludge that dripped without ever forming a pool. I passed one door that was open just a crack, and I heard it, breathing. Not mine, not human. Slow, wet, deliberate. I didn't look in. I couldn't. I walked faster. Soon, the tunnel split. To the left, a stairway spiraled sharply down, lit by green glass lanterns. To the right, a hallway stretched out into utter blackness. But something down that path smelled like flowers, roses, sweet, rotting roses. A familiar voice echoed from the right. Ethan's. "Daniel, you have to help me. They took my face. I can't see. I can't see." I stopped cold. It wasn't Ethan. I knew it wasn't Ethan. He was gone. But the voice was identical. The cadence, the panic, the choked sob at the end of his words. The girl had said they were hungry. I turned and took the stairway. As I descended, the stone steps gave way to wood. Old, splintering boards that creaked underfoot. The lanterns flickered more violently here, casting shifting shadows that looked far too human in shape, always just a step behind me, just out of reach. At the bottom, I found the cathedral. It wasn't built. It was grown, vast, cavernous, miles wide. The walls were roots, massive, tangled cords of gnarled, blackened wood that pulsed as if alive. In the center stood an altar, not of stone, but of bone, real, human bone, stacked and polished and fused into a shape I couldn't comprehend. It throbbed faintly, as though it breathed, and behind it, the clock. It rose from the earth like a monument almost 30 feet tall, made entirely of teeth, some small, some massive, some flat, some pointed, all yellowed and cracked with age. It had no hands, no face, only a single pendulum-shaped fang swinging back and forth with a sound like a heartbeat. Thud, thud, thud. And with each swing, the cathedral responded, a low hum that made the roots twitch and the bones rattle. This was what they meant, the clock beneath the earth. It didn't keep time, it kept them. I stepped forward, and my foot caught on something buried in the mossy floor. I bent down and brushed it clean. Another letter, the 9th. "Daniel, the fang swings for you. You must choose. Turn the key and end it, or let them come. Let the bells ring once more. We are listening." There was no key, but there was a hollow in the altar, perfectly shaped for something familiar. My hand moved on its own, pulling the old rusted bell from my pack. I didn't even remember placing it there. I stared at it. I could ring it. I could end this, or begin it again, or something worse. Behind me, the breathing had returned. Only now it was louder. I turned, and the girl was there again, or something wearing her shape. Her black eyes were wide, her mouth, too, stretching, cracking at the corners. "Tick-tock," she said. Then her jaw unhinged, and she screamed. Not a sound of fear. A signal. All around me, the walls began to pulse. Roots peeled away from the stone like ribs. From behind them, they came, the veiled ones, the watchers, the things that had whispered in the forest and knocked at my door. They were here, and they were waiting for me to decide. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They only watched. The watchers, tall, draped in translucent, moth-eaten veils, ringed the altar in total silence. Dozens of them, perhaps more, their pale forms rising out of the breathing walls like memories given flesh. The only sound in the cathedral was the slow, metronomic thud of the fang pendulum in the clock behind me, and the wet hiss of the girl's jaw still hanging open. I clutched the bell in my fist. Its rusted iron surface felt almost warm now, thrumming in sync with the tooth clock's pendulum, as if both were tied to the same heart, or feeding off the same dying one. My name echoed in my skull. Daniel. But it wasn't a voice from outside. It was the cathedral itself. The ground beneath me shifted subtly, and I realized the very earth, or whatever passed for it in this place, was rising and falling like a lung taking in shallow, wheezing breaths. I took a step back from the altar, and the watchers responded. They inched forward, not as a group, not in unison. Each of them moved as if guided by a different rhythm, a different will. One twitched, another glided. A third one staggered with its limbs twisted at unnatural angles, dragging something sharp behind it that scraped across the bone tiles like broken glass. Thud, thud. The pendulum never stopped. The letter, the ninth, still lay open at my feet. Turn the key and end it, or let them come. I looked at the bell again. What if it wasn't a key at all? What if it was an invitation? What if they wanted me to ring it? The watchers were closer now, still silent, still faceless beneath those veils. But I could feel their hunger, not just for flesh, but for presence, for being. They wanted back, not just into this world, but into minds, into belief. It was what the letters had been warning me about all along, or maybe luring me into. I dropped to my knees, staring at the hollow in the altar. The bell would fit perfectly, but every instinct screamed at me not to do it. I could still run. I could still backtrack through the tunnel, flee the cathedral, follow the twisting halls of root and rot until I found the surface again. Leave the letters behind. Let this place collapse into itself. Then I remembered Ethan. I remembered the field of hands reaching up from the black soil, the woman in the white dress with her mouth sewn shut, the corridor with no floor and no sky. I wasn't in my world anymore. I had passed through too many doors, and the longer I stayed here, the more I felt something peeling away inside me, like the layers of self, of identity, were thinning. The watchers took another step forward, and then one of them did something different. It knelt right before the altar. Its veil slid back ever so slightly, and beneath it, I saw a mouth. Not one mouth. Many. Dozens of tiny, misshapen mouths where its eyes should have been. They whispered in a sickening harmony. Not words. Sounds. Like a child learning to speak for the first time by mimicking what it hears. The tongues in those mouths flickered, and all of them hissed, "Ring it, Daniel!" My spine locked. Then another watcher dropped to its knees, and another, and another. Soon they all were kneeling, heads bowed, mouths whispering that same phrase again and again. Ring it. Ring it. Ring it. The cathedral was no longer silent. It had become a choir, not of voices but of desire. And I understood then that they weren't the ones giving orders. Not truly. They were servants, vessels, conduits for something far deeper beneath the stone. The clock. I turned and looked at it, and it looked back. No face, no eyes, but I knew with terrible certainty that something inside it was awake now, watching me through every crack in the stone, through the roots, through the bones, through time itself. A noise began to rise in my ears, like static, but far older, heavier. It sounded like people screaming backward, like hundreds of voices being rewound. And in between the noise, the sound of ticking grew sharper, more urgent. Tick, 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 tick. Faster and faster. I pressed the bell into the hollow of the altar. The whispers stopped instantly. Every watcher went still. The cathedral held its breath. And then I touched the top of the bell. The metal was burning hot now. I knew if I pulled my hand away, I'd lose skin. But I didn't. I gripped it tighter and rang it. The sound wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a ring. It was a scream. Not from the bell, from the earth itself. The entire cathedral shook as if struck by lightning. Roots flailed from the walls. Dust and old bone fell from the ceiling. The altar cracked. The watchers howled, some in ecstasy, others in agony. The girl reappeared in the air above the altar. Her limbs spread like a marionette. Her eyes pitch black. Her mouth filled with ash that poured from her lips like water. "You've fed the wound," she said, and then she vanished. And I was alone again. Except the clock had stopped. The fang pendulum no longer swung. It hung in the center, motionless, waiting. And that's when I heard it. Something knocking from inside it. Once, twice, then 3 times. Something in the clock wanted out. And I had just given it permission. There's a particular silence that follows the collapse of a scream. Not peace, not relief, but the stunned quiet of something ancient, waiting to see if it was heard. That's what filled the cathedral after I rang the bell. The watchers were gone, not faded, not vanished. Gone, as if they'd never existed. No shadows, no footprints, just air thick with the smell of hot metal and something sweeter, riper, like decay hiding beneath perfume. And then the knocking started again. 3 slow thuds from behind the enormous clock. Not just behind it, inside it. The fang pendulum no longer moved. The hands of the clock were frozen at 3:33. Both hands, pointing directly down. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong, like it had always been counting toward this moment, and now that it had arrived, something had to come through. Knock, knock, knock. Then the sound of splintering. Hairline fractures formed across the glass of the clock face. But it wasn't normal glass. When the shards fell, they didn't tinkle. They howled. Each fragment released a low, drawn-out moan as it hit the altar floor, curling and twitching like dying insects. I backed away, clutching the bell, which had gone cold in my hand. It felt heavier now, almost hollowed out, like I'd wrung something out of it. The clock door creaked open. It wasn't mechanical. There were no gears, no springs, no pendulums behind the facade. Instead, there was a staircase. Thin, narrow steps spiraling down, wrapped in chain. At first I thought it was an illusion, but the air coming from the stairs was real. It smelled like wet iron and old breath. And something else. The sound of a heartbeat. Not mine, slower, deeper, like the pulse of a giant. Something inside me said, "Turn back." Something else said, "You can't." The door behind me had closed. Not with noise, with certainty. Like the dream where you realize the hallway you came from is gone, and it's just you now, and the choice you made. I stepped onto the staircase. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. Down, down, down. The stairs narrowed. The walls grew tighter, closer, until I had to hunch forward. It felt like walking through a throat. The walls were slick with condensation, and the occasional line of what looked like old carvings, symbols that pulsed faintly as I passed them. I descended for what felt like hours. There was no light source, no torch, no flame, but I could see somehow. Everything glowed faintly, as if my eyes had been rewired to see whatever this place wanted me to see. At the bottom was a door. Not a wooden door, not stone. This one looked stitched, Rows and rows of yellowed teeth were embedded into the surface, with rusted pins hammered between them to hold the seams together. A single round hole sat in the center, the perfect size for the bell. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But when I tried to step back, my foot wouldn't lift. I wasn't in control anymore. My hand raised on its own, placed the bell into the hole. A deep click, like a spine snapping into alignment. The door opened inward. The room beyond wasn't large. It was impossibly large. The ceiling stretched into darkness, and the walls were made entirely of interwoven limbs, hands, arms, ribs, pressed tightly together in a breathing, pulsing lattice. At the center of the room stood a figure, not tall, not monstrous, familiar. He wore my face. He stood in perfect stillness, hands clasped behind his back, dressed in a simple black suit. His skin was pale and thin like wax that had been left too close to a flame. His eyes were where mine should be, but wrong. No iris, no pupil, just smooth, glassy black. And when he smiled, I saw the inside of his mouth wasn't flesh, but clockwork. Rows of tiny gears turned behind his teeth, and his throat ticked faintly with every slow breath. "I was wondering when I'd come," he said. His voice was my voice, a fraction slower, slightly deeper, like a recording played on a dying battery. "What are you?" I whispered. He cocked his head. "Wrong question." And then, without moving his lips, he spoke again. But in me. I heard his words inside my chest like my ribs were his mouth. "I am what fills the time between thoughts." He stepped forward. I didn't back away. Couldn't. My limbs were heavy with that same paralysis I felt the first night in the forest. He walked in a slow circle around me, appraising me like an antique. His fingers occasionally flicked forward to touch my shoulder, my cheek, my hair. When he passed behind me, I felt him lean close to my ear and whisper, "You were always meant to bring me here." I turned, forced myself to speak. "This isn't real." "Oh," he said mockingly. "Real?" He gestured upward, and for a moment the ceiling flickered. Above us, for just a heartbeat, I saw the forest again, the real world. My apartment, my memories, all playing in reverse like old film melting in a projector. "Reality," he said, "is just the longest lie you haven't questioned yet." I looked at the walls, at the hands twitching softly in the bone lattice. "What is this place?" "This," he said, smiling again, "this is the hollow, the place time forgets, the breath between ticks, the black between blinks." He reached into his chest and pulled something out, a small bone-white cube, smooth and humming faintly. "This," he said, "is your next letter." I didn't want to touch it, but I did. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, it opened, unfolding in midair like paper turning inside out. There were no words, just symbols, diagrams. One of them looked like the girl from the altar. Another looked like me, lying in bed, surrounded by thin figures in the dark. "You've seen them already," he said. "They walk between the thoughts you forget." I turned back to him. "Why me?" He smiled wider now. The gears behind his teeth clicked and spun faster. "Because you listen." And then he stepped backward, melting into the bone wall. Gone. The room began to collapse, not violently but with finality, like the dream was ending, and reality had decided to reclaim its space. I turned and ran, the cube clutched in my hands, back through the stitched door, up the stairs, which now bled from the walls with each step, back into the cathedral, which now hung sideways in an impossible sky. The altar was gone. The watchers were back, but now they bowed to me. I was no longer the visitor. I was the herald. They say that madness creeps in like a slow tide, subtle, inevitable, gentle until your feet can no longer feel the ground. I now believe It can fall upon you all at once, a wave that crashes so hard it rearranges your bones. I returned from the hollow with the cube still in my hands. The cathedral was no longer a structure of stone and shadow. It was open, the way a wound opens, raw and pink at the edges. The sky above twisted like an inverted whirlpool, stained in long veins of red and black, as if God had left the canvas out in the rain. And the watchers, all 33 of them, had gathered in a perfect circle around the place where the altar once stood. They did not move. They didn't blink. But I felt their attention, their reverence for me. I didn't know why. I didn't want it. The cube pulsed faintly in my palm, whispering in that same forgotten language I couldn't quite remember. But there were feelings within it, commands that bypassed the mind and settled deep into the marrow. Take this to the place where dust stays warm. I didn't know where that was. Not yet, but the watchers did. They turned in unison and walked. No sound, no footsteps, just presence. I followed. We left the cathedral through a passage I hadn't noticed before. Not a hallway, but a corridor of ribs spiraling downward into darkness that wasn't absence of light, but light's inverse. Here, even the shadows cast silhouettes. The deeper we went, the more I felt the structure shift, from carved rock to bone, then to something more alien. The air grew thick with moisture and old static. A low hum rose from the walls, vibrating in my teeth, and occasionally the cube would emit a faint tone in response, like it was singing along. We emerged into a chamber shaped like a cracked egg. This was the place where dust stays warm. I knew at the moment my feet touched the floor, which was not stone, not dirt, but compressed ash. And it was warm, pulsing softly, as if from some furnace below that had never gone out. All around the chamber, small indentations dotted the ground, as if hundreds of bodies had once curled there, fetal and still. In the center stood a cradle, not made for a baby. It was long, narrow, fitted to a very specific shape, mine. I didn't want to step forward. My instincts were screaming now, clearer than they had since I entered this nightmare. But the watchers did not force me. They waited, and the cube, it began to float, slowly rising from my hands, as if weightless, until it hovered over the cradle. With a faint chime, it split into 3 perfect pieces, which spun in place and began etching symbols into the air. Each symbol glowed for a heartbeat before being absorbed by the ceiling above, which looked more and more like skin stretched over bone. I watched, frozen, as the symbols formed a constellation. The moment the last one hung in place, a soft click echoed across the chamber. From the far wall, a door opened, not with grandeur, just a shift in pressure, like the world exhaling. And from that door came a man. Not the one from the hollow. Not me. Someone else. He was tall, dressed in a dusty gray suit that looked like it had been dug from the ground and brushed off in a hurry. His face was clean-shaven, but gaunt, the kind of thin that suggested something had been eating him from the inside, and over his heart was a small brass key sewn into the fabric of his suit. He carried a violin case. The watchers moved. They didn't bow this time. They knelt. All of them, in perfect silence. And the man, this hollow musician or priest or god, stepped to the center and placed the case beside the cradle. He looked at me. His voice was not human. It was a memory you forgot you had, a bedtime story you only half remembered, a song you swore you heard once as a child, drifting in through your bedroom window. You've opened the first gate. I couldn't speak. You rang the bell of silence, faced your reflection in the hollow, walked the stair that counts backwards. He nodded, almost solemnly. You are ready. For what? I finally croaked. To play. He opened the case. Inside was not a violin. It was a spine, still wet. The bones etched with runes so fine they looked like veins. Where the strings should have been were nerves, pulled taut, humming with soft pulses of red light. "You must lie in the cradle." I backed away. Number, I didn't come here for this. "But you did," he said. "You just forgot. We all forget. That's what makes the remembering so sacred." The watchers rose, not to grab me, to surround the cradle. A silent choir waiting for the first note. I wanted to run. I did. I turned and ran back toward the corridor, but it was gone. There was only a wall, smooth, seamless. The cube, still spinning in the air, now began to slow. The symbols faded, and I knew with a clarity sharper than pain, that if I didn't lie in that cradle, I would never wake again. Not in my bed, not in my life, not even in death. I turned, walked forward, and climbed into the cradle. It was warm, too warm. It fit me perfectly. The man with the key stepped closer, raised the instrument. The watchers opened their mouths in perfect unison. No sound came out, until the first note played. And then, I remembered everything. I remembered the other world, the before, the letter I was never supposed to read, the forest that bends, the girl in the water, the voice on the tape. I saw them all dancing around the truth like moths, trying not to be noticed by the flame. The note went on. It was not music. It was unmaking, and I realized the hollow didn't want to keep me. It wanted to send me, but not back, forward, to the place after forgetting, where all the doors are locked, except one. And that door was opening now. I expected death. The kind of death that doesn't announce itself with scythes or cloaks or final sighs, but simply slips over you like water. And when you look down, there's nothing left to cast a shadow. Instead, I woke up, but not in the cradle, not in the cathedral, not even in the hollow. I was standing in a hallway, barefoot, cold stone beneath my feet. The walls were made of books, stacked, bound, and mortared together with yellowed pages. Their spines were old, their titles unreadable, faded into the leather like scars. The air smelled like mildew and salt. Behind me, the hallway simply ended. There was no beginning, just a flat wall of stone. Ahead, a single door, tall, heavy, made of something too dark to be wood, too porous to be metal. There were carvings on its surface, and not of symbols or saints, but of mouths, dozens of them. Some open, some stitched shut. One was screaming. As I stepped closer, the mouths twitched. One of them smiled. I tried to speak, to ask where I was, but I couldn't make a sound. My voice felt trapped, like it was still waiting to be born. The only thing I could do was keep walking, keep obeying. The door opened by itself, not with hinges or groaning wood. It unzipped. A long seam split down the middle, and the door peeled open like a wound. Inside, the air was warm and wet. I stepped through. The room beyond was circular, impossibly tall, the ceiling lost in shadows. There were no lights, but everything glowed with a faint, nauseous hue, like rotting amber. The floor was made of hands, not sculpted, not stone. Real hands. Petrified in place, palms up, as if offering or pleading. And in the center, a throne. But not for a king. It was made from chairs. Dozens of them. School chairs, dining chairs, a rocking chair, a dentist's seat. All twisted and fused into a tangled tower. And on that throne sat a figure. I say figure because it barely looked human anymore. Its head was encased in a metal cage, like a bird feeder inverted and locked. Wires snaked out from the bars and disappeared into the ceiling. Its torso was exposed, flesh layered like pages, ribs opening and closing like gills. Its arms were long, too long, and in one of its hands it clutched a small object, a cassette tape. The other hand was held out toward me. palm open, empty, waiting. Something behind me moved. I turned and saw the violin man from the cradle. His suit was darker now, dustier. His eyes no longer reflected light. "You took the song," he said. "Now give the voice." I didn't understand. He stepped aside, and the watchers entered. But something was wrong with them. They were melting. Their faces were slipping off like wax in the heat, their arms dripping like candle stubs. Yet they walked perfectly, their eyes never wavering. Each of them carried an item: a mirror, a broken compass, a child's stuffed toy, a clock with no hands. They surrounded me, humming something low and hollow. The throne creature raised the cassette tape, spoke for the first time. "Place your voice in my palm," it said, "and you may choose your exit." I finally understood. Not intellectually, not rationally. I understood viscerally. The hollow, the cathedral, the cradle, the violin, the cube. It was a process, a rite, one that refines a person, removes all the detritus of self and memory and logic until you're nothing but essence. And now, they wanted mine. Not to consume, to record. The tape was blank. I was the final voice it needed. I looked down at my chest, and for the first time, saw the sigil that had been burned into my skin, faintly glowing, shaped like an eye or a lock. Beneath it, I felt my voice stir, not in my throat, in my heart. I stepped forward, pressed 2 fingers to the creature's palm, and let it take me. The pain was elegant, like a knife, sliding between ribs without haste or anger. A quiet undoing, a long silence unfolding from the center of me outward. And then the tape spun. The creature nodded. "You may choose." The throne split down the center, revealing 2 doors behind it. One was old wood, nailed shut in a frantic, desperate pattern. Scratches lined the frame, blood, bits of fingernails. Whatever was behind that door had been trying to escape for a very long time. The other door was beautiful, carved from ivory, polished to a mirror shine. A single word etched in gold at its center: home. But it was a lie. I don't know how I knew. I just did. That door didn't lead home. It led to a memory of home, a dream, a loop. The voice that was no longer mine echoed in my head. They let you choose, so you'll never question. And still, I almost reached for it, until I heard a voice behind me. A real one. Small. Scared. "Hello?" I turned. In the archway stood a child, a girl no more than 6, dressed in a tattered yellow raincoat. Her eyes were wide, confused. She looked familiar, too familiar. And then I remembered the girl in the mirror, the girl I saw on the tape, the one who whispered in the cathedral walls. She reached out to me, fingers trembling. Are you the one who found the letter?" My heart stopped, and with it, the world. Everything in the throne, the doors, the watchers, froze. She walked toward me, and as she did, the shadows recoiled. The light bent. Even the throne creature shrank back. "Please," she said, "don't pick a door yet." I knelt. "Why?" She leaned in, whispered something, and I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. Because she wasn't supposed to be here. And if she wasn't supposed to be here, neither was I. She told me her name was Elsie. And though her voice was soft and raw, it carried the weight of a confession. A name whispered in the dark is never just a name. It's a bond, a plea, a thread that pulls you towards something you may not want to understand. Elsie reached for my hand, and without hesitation, I took it. As soon as our fingers touched, the doors behind the throne vanished. So did the watchers. The throne itself collapsed inward with a wet, sickening crack, folding into itself like an exhale after a scream. The room dimmed, and the glow of the walls faded to nothing. Only Elsie remained lit, as though she carried her own sun beneath her skin. She looked up at me, eyes wide and ancient. "They put me here because I remembered something I wasn't supposed to." "What did you remember?" I asked. Her mouth twitched, not a smile, a flinch. "That it's not a dream," she said. "None of this is. They want you to think it is, because then you won't fight it. But the hollow is real, and it's not a place you visit. It's a place you're pulled to." We stood in a void now. No walls, no floor. Only the suggestion of space. Her presence the only anchor. "Pulled how?" I asked. She turned and began walking, still holding my hand. With each step, floor materialized beneath us. Slick, black, like glass smeared with ash. The further we walked, the louder something beneath us became. A ticking, like 1,000 clocks winding backward. "Everyone who ends up here touches something," she said. "An object, something cursed, something carved. It marks you, marks your dreams. That's how they find you." "They?" She stopped. We stood before a new structure now, impossibly tall and jagged, like a library built by something that had never seen a straight line. Its walls were layered with flesh-thin pages, flapping in a wind I couldn't feel. A staircase curved around its outer wall, spiraling into the dark above. "They used to be called archivists," she said. "But that was a long time ago, before they started changing." "Archivists of what?" She looked up at the tower, her face pale in its shadow. "Of people." Before I could ask more, she started to climb. I followed, the steps groaning underfoot. With each turn around the tower, the pages rustled louder, like 1,000 whispers growing agitated. "They make recordings," she said, not looking back, "of dreams, of memories, of screams. They file them into people, literally like books. That's what the sigils are for." I touched the mark on my chest. It had faded, but I could still feel its outline like a bruise under the skin. "They're writing in us?" She nodded. "The hollow is one big archive. Every corridor, every cradle, every mirror. It's just a chapter. You're walking through someone else's memory, sometimes your own." I stopped climbing. My knees felt weak. "Why me?" Elsie paused. "There's no why, only when." We reached a small landing halfway up the tower. A door opened as we approached. No handle, no keyhole. Just a rectangle of warped wood, split down the middle with a line of rusted staples. Inside was a single room, and in the center of the room, a man stood perfectly still. Or rather, a shell of a man. His skin was translucent, tight over his bones like plastic wrap. His eyes were open but glassy, his mouth frozen mid-scream. Dozens of wires pierced his body, running from his back into the walls like veins. Elsie looked up at him. "This is what happens when you don't choose," she whispered. I stepped closer, the air thick with rot and static. "What do you mean?" "They give everyone a choice at the end of their journey," she said. "You saw it. The doors. Most choose the lie, the dream. They go back, reliving their favorite memory forever, until their mind collapses. Others choose the nightmare, hoping to wake up. But that door doesn't lead to waking. It leads to service." I looked at the man again. "No one escapes, do they?" "No," she said, "but not everyone forgets." The wires pulsed and the man twitched. A sound escaped his throat, a hiss, like a needle dragging over vinyl. Then the walls around us began to open. Not slide, open. Flesh and paper peeled back, revealing thousands, millions of faces bound into the archive, eyes wide, mouths sewn shut. Some were still alive, most weren't. Their expressions were frozen in terror, awe, confusion. Every person who's ever wandered into the hollow, Elsie whispered. All kept here, all filed and read and rewritten. She turned to me. You're not the first. I stepped back, heart pounding. And what makes me different? She hesitated. Because you heard me. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small item. At first, I thought it was a compass. But as she turned it in her hands, I saw what it really was. A mirror. Tiny, cracked. The same one I'd seen buried in the ash outside the cathedral, the same one from the tape. She held it out. This is your next step. I stared into it. At first, I saw only my reflection. Then, the glass began to ripple. I saw the cradle, the cube, the violin, the girl. I saw myself standing over a bed, whispering something into my own ear as I slept. And behind me, the watchers. All of them. And one other figure. Taller, hidden behind a veil of static. Watching. Waiting. Elsie closed my hand around the mirror. Go deeper, she said. The room collapsed. We fell through layers of memory, of voices, of light and darkness braided together like roots in old soil. And then, black. The fall felt eternal. I had no sense of direction, no up, no down, only the crushing pull of movement and the storm of sound surrounding me. It was like being submerged in 1,000 overlapping frequencies, crying, laughter, static, music, whispers so soft they felt like they were being spoken inside my skull. And then, impact. But not hard, like falling into deep water. The first thing I saw was my breath. It coiled in the cold air like smoke. I was lying in the middle of a hallway, not a dream hallway. A real one, or so it seemed. The walls were tiled and faded green, the kind you might find in a hospital built 50 years ago. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but they flickered erratically, leaving pockets of darkness between each hum. I stood, my limbs slow, sore. My clothes were damp, as if I had been submerged in fog. The mirror Elsie had given me was still in my hand, but now the glass was completely black. Obsidian, absorbing light. I tucked it into my pocket, heart hammering. The hallway stretched in both directions, but at the end of one side was a door. Just one, plain, metal, no window. It was open, slightly ajar like someone had just stepped through it and forgotten to close it behind them. I walked toward it, each footstep echoing like it didn't quite belong to me. As I passed beneath the flickering lights, I could swear the shadows shifted, not away from me, but toward. I paused at the door. My hand hovered over the handle. Then, footsteps behind me. I spun, but the hallway was empty. No sound, only that creeping sense of being watched. I turned back and pushed the door open. Inside was a hospital room. The bed was empty, but the sheets were rumpled. An IV stand leaned to one side, half crushed like something had fallen against it. The monitor beside the bed was still on, showing a flat line. But that wasn't what stopped me. It was the photographs on the wall. Hundreds of them. Polaroids, thumbtacked to every inch of white tile. Pictures of me, sleeping, walking, staring into the camera. Some were close-ups of my eyes, my hands, my back as I walked down a corridor. Others were blurred, as though taken mid-motion. And some, God help me, were of me in this very room. I turned to the corner expecting to see a camera. There wasn't one, just a mirror, identical to the one in my pocket. But this one showed movement. Not mine, someone else's. A figure behind me, tall, lean, blurred as if out of phase. I turned again. Nothing. The mirror was still. My reflection staring back. Only now there was something wrong with it. My reflection didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Its eyes were too wide. The whites too bright. It tilted its head slightly. I did not. That's when it smiled. I didn't. My stomach dropped. And then it spoke. Not aloud, not in sound, but directly into my mind. a voice like ice cracking underwater. "You're close now. He's almost ready to wake up." I backed away. The reflection stepped forward. The photos on the wall fluttered, even though no wind stirred the air. The monitor beeped once. A tone that didn't stop. High-pitched, piercing. The mirror shattered, and the room went dark. When the lights came back, I was no longer in the hospital. I stood in a vast underground chamber, the ceiling so high it vanished into blackness. Hundreds of beds filled the space, each with a person lying still beneath pristine white sheets. A soft humming filled the air, like distant lullabies being played through broken speakers. And at the center of the room was a single cradle, wooden, rocking gently, as if someone had just stepped away. A cold wind blew through the room. I approached the cradle slowly, and as I did, I saw a small envelope resting inside it. On the front, a single word: "Return." My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a key, old, iron, ornate, the kind you might find in a forgotten mansion or buried inside a church's altar. I turned it over in my hand, and suddenly a scream ripped through the silence. From one of the beds, a man sat bolt upright, gasping for air, eyes wide and white and wrong. His mouth opened too wide, dislocating like it had no bone to stop it. More people began to stir, writhing under the sheets, mouths opening in perfect silent screams. And then they all turned their heads toward me, in unison. The lullaby ceased. The air went still, and a voice filled the space. Familiar. "You shouldn't have come back." It was me, but not quite. The voice was older, worn, corrupted. I turned, and there I stood, on the far end of the chamber, watching. No longer an observer, but the conductor. The sleepers rose, not like people, like puppets, their joints bending wrong, their eyes leaking ink. They came toward me, slow, unstoppable. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. The key in my hand began to glow. And ahead, one final door, ancient, carved in runes I didn't understand but recognized, the same ones as the cradle, as the mirror, as the sigil in my skin. I jammed the key into the lock. The door opened, and I stepped through, not knowing if I was escaping or stepping into the very thing that had been waiting for me all along. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with the sound of finality, a sound that felt like it echoed through my bones. Silence followed. Not the kind of silence you find in a quiet room, but the absolute absence of anything. No air, no breath, no heartbeat, just void. I stood in pitch black. Then, a single whisper. "He's waking up." A light flared in the distance, pale, flickering like candlelight. I walked toward it, each step feeling more dreamlike than the last. My feet didn't touch anything solid, yet I moved. The darkness thinned until I saw where the light was coming from. It was a room. Simple, familiar, a child's bedroom, blue walls, stars glued to the ceiling, a bookshelf with worn paperbacks, a toy chest, a small bed pushed into the corner where a child slept soundly beneath heavy blankets. I knew this room. It was mine. From years ago. From a life I'd tried to forget. I approached the bed, throat tight. The child stirred, tossed. Sweat glistened on his skin. He whimpered in his sleep. As I got closer, I saw the mirror beside the bed. The same mirror. The obsidian one. Only now, it showed two reflections. Mine, and something behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. But in the mirror, the shape was still there. Closer now. Leaning in toward the child. Its face obscured. No eyes. No features. Just a swirl of shadow. The child whimpered again. Then spoke. Not a whisper, not a cry, but a word. "Don't let it in." I acted on instinct. I reached out, grabbing the mirror and hurling it to the ground. It shattered. The reflection splintered. The figure shrieked, not from the glass but from inside me, like something tearing away from bone. The room flickered. And suddenly I wasn't alone. They were all there, all the sleepers, all the faces I'd seen. Ethan, Elsie, the figure in the cradle, the watchers in the woods, the man at the end of the hallway, my reflection. They stood in a circle around the room, silent, still, watching. And in the middle, between them and me, the boy sat up in bed and looked at me. His eyes were mine, young, clear, but afraid. You let it out. I didn't know. It lives in sleep. It waits. It learns us. Wears us. The sleepers took a step forward, in perfect unison. The boy stood, barely reaching my chest. You let it wear you. I looked down, and saw my arms weren't mine anymore. The veins were dark, branching, like roots, like cracks. My skin was ash-colored, thin. Beneath it, something pulsed, something awake. I screamed, but the sound came out wrong, like metal scraping against metal. The boy held something out to me, a small stone, flat, carved with a symbol, the one I had found in my skin. Take it back, he said. Seal it. The circle of sleepers closed in. I grabbed the stone. The symbol burned into my palm. The world folded in on itself. A flash, a sound like thunder underwater, and I was back. I woke up on the floor of Elsie's apartment. Everything was dark. The only light came from the television, where static danced across the screen. My heart thudded painfully. I sat up slowly, my head splitting. My phone was on the floor next to me, dead, but scrawled across the wooden floor in dark ink, no blood, were 3 words: "Don't sleep again." The mirror was gone. So was Elsie. I stumbled to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and there, scrawled across the mirror in the same dark streaks, was the symbol. I looked at my reflection. It stared back, blinking in rhythm with me, breathing with me. But I didn't trust it. Not anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. The next night, I tried. But I could feel it again, curling at the edges of my dreams, watching. It wants to come through. And every night I resist. It learns me a little better. It waits for the moment I slip. It waits for the moment you do too. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and pull the covers over you, just make sure the mirror in your room is covered. Because when it finally gets out again, it won't knock. It will already be inside. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know. Where are you listening from? And what story do you carry? Until next time, keep your light close and your shadows closer. Good night.